A pleasure to meet you all today. Before we get started, one of the things that I would love to do, because I'm on my laptop today, so it's I'm not gonna, as I'm doing my presentation, I won't be able to see you all. And thank you, Alina, for agreeing to just keep your eyes on the chat and feel free to interrupt. I definitely want this to be discussional if we can, and so please feel free to share questions along the way. But if you wouldn't mind using your reactions, I think all of us are pretty adept at using Zoom at this point, but I would love to know just kind of the composition of people who are in the room. And so if you're a provider, can you do like some kind of reaction? You can do whatever reaction you want, thumbs up, heart, something. Okay, great. Just so I can kind of get a sense of like who's in the room. Perfect. Thank you. That is super helpful. And then folks that are like staff, support staff, are there any on the call? Great. And I recognize sometimes those overlap, but. And then leadership in the room. It's helpful to know. Great. Okay, good. Well, thank you so much. That's helpful, just making sure that I'm kind of keeping the audience in perspective as I'm sharing my slides. So I am going to do a share and we'll go from here. Okay. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Christy Ward. I have been working in federally qualified health centers for the last 15 or so years and I'm a nurse. So I've done a lot of different roles, but I really found my love in federally qualified health centers and community health centers specifically. So over the last 10 years, I have been working very actively in the patient-centered behavioral health realm and have been very excited and really excited today to be working with Mental Health of America, Greater Houston, to be able to present this presentation. So we will go ahead and get it started. Oh, I didn't share. So I'm the CEO currently of an organization in Orange County, California, and we have about 8 locations, all have integrated primary care in those locations. And so again, glad to be joining you today. So there we go. So today what I want to do is be able to share the importance. So as we're thinking about projects, and this very much in the realm of integrated behavioral health, we really want to talk about the leadership role in that. We need leadership buy-in and commitment. And so through this presentation, what I want to do is help you understand the importance of both of those. Understand the role of leadership during the implementation phase. So as we are rolling out projects, this project, just understanding how critical and what the role is of the leader in that. And then talking further about leadership endorsement of projects and leadership rounding. So those are the objectives of this discussion. So leadership buy-in, just to kind of define that, it refers to the support that you receive from management within your organization regarding an initiative that you may be leading. So this aspect is critical of the overall success of the project for a lot of different reasons. First, there's resource allocation. So the allocation of resources to a project you to be able to get that in place. I'm going to ask a super quick question. Are you able to just see the slides, or are you seeing people's pictures as well?
We're seeing just the slides.
Okay, good. I just want, my view is showing something different, and I wanted to make sure you weren't looking at your faces also during the presentation. So thank you. So as far as resource allocation, you're likely going to need resources. We often need people and other things to be able to get a project off the ground. And so, you know, resources as in tools, technology, budgetary allocations are critical to that. And without leadership support, it can be challenging to secure those resources for a successful launch or execution of a project. So resource allocation, one very important part about leadership buy-in. The next is around influence and support. So leaders need and have the ability to mobilize and influence other members of the organization. Their endorsement can motivate and inspire others to get on board, leading to wider acceptance and cooperation from teams and stakeholders. And I imagine you can all think of examples where there was a project that was being launched and you had people that maybe weren't on board, and there wasn't a leader that was saying, hey, everybody, this is really important. And what happened with that project? You know, sometimes that can be what is the make or break if you don't have leaders that are actively supporting. And then to that point, the third thing that's really important about leadership buy-in is like that overcoming resistance. So change initiatives in themselves can often face resistance from various stakeholders, and leadership buy-in provides a shield against resistance by demonstrating that that initiative has the backing of top-level management. This can help overcome resistance and lead to a smoother implementation. Therefore, leadership buy-in is critical for both securing the necessary resources, making important decisions, aligning with your organizational goals, and overcoming resistance, as well as creating positive momentum for your initiative. It increases the likelihood of success and provides the necessary support and influence to drive meaningful change within the organization. So when we talk about influence, there we go. While strong leadership is a widely recognized component of any high-performing system, the unique role of executive leadership of supporting change for improvement is often underestimated. You need to have committed and engaged, sustained leadership, and that's essential at the executive sponsor level and at the operational level to support change and integration. And it helps to facilitate people, like having people buy-in, as it refers to in this, in order for that project to be able to be fully implemented. There are lots of challenges, however, that leaders on a day-to-day can experience. So leadership often have these competing priorities, including staff turnover, recruitment challenges, change management, time in general, can be a real challenge. But it's important for leaders to not get caught up in the distractions and the challenges that are part of the day-to-day. When we are talking about a project that needs to be managed and secured with their involvement, we need to make sure that leaders are keeping that in mind and prioritizing that project. So it's important to pull out of those distractions and be really visible. It's important for leaders to be supportive of the project, really truly understanding what the challenges are. We want to celebrate the wins too. There's lots of things that are going along the way, and doing that recognition along the way is really critical, but also looking at what are the barriers and how do we problem solve those. And a lot of this is making sure that that communication line with your staff is so in place and essential, that you're staying connected to the project and the work. Studies consistently have shown that committed and engaged or sustained leadership is the single most important must-have requirement for any initiative, such as the integration of behavioral health and primary health care. Senior leadership has been identified as one of the critical management and cultural factors that lead to relative success or failure of learning collaboratives. So that's really important to keep in mind, is that although oftentimes we have staff that are leading projects and have folks that we've elevated to help with leading those projects. The role of that senior leader cannot be underestimated in order to support those folks as well. So let's speak specifically about the role of leadership in the implementation phase. So we're going to move on to that. So in this diagram really shows you those 3 areas of leadership. So there's directive leadership, there's inclusive leadership, and there's delegating leadership. And there's this fine line in between directive and inclusive leadership where transformation happens. That's the transformational leadership that's both directive and inclusive. It requires an investment of time, energy, and management, which demands the leaders to be engaged and being very on top of that. The investment of time, energy, and management focus pays off through more efficient and effective execution, and then therefore more sustainable results. Over time, that transformational leadership the transformation itself takes hold, and leaders can then shift more into that delegating leadership style, where they are providing more of the vision and strategic priorities. They're delegating execution, but what they really need to be during that transformational leadership is more hands-on, really holding accountability, and helping to ensure that those milestones get hit. So I want to just take a moment, and we're going to watch a quick video regarding senior leadership buy-in and engagement. And of note, just as we're watching this video, this was specifically highlighting a DEI project. So just of note, she will reference the DEI project in there. But overall, I just felt that this is such a great video, and I've shown it multiple times, and it really gets to the essence of leadership. So let me know quickly if you are not able to hear it. We've tested it, but hopefully this should launch.
Week, I want to continue with discussing the importance of having your senior leaders be bought in at the very beginning of any diversity, equity, and inclusion engagement. But I also want to talk about how it's also important for them to be engaged throughout the process. So let me talk about both these pieces because they're both so important. So at the beginning of the engagement, you want your senior leaders to all be bought in. And what I mean by that is they have to have a shared vision of what this work is going to entail and why they're embarking on this. And that is very different from just checking the box and saying, yes, diversity, equity, and inclusion is important. We hear it's important, and we should be doing something about this. So every single person on the executive leadership team, your top layer of leaders within an organization, should all be articulating or should all be on the same page in terms of what is the purpose of engaging in this work as an organization. So what are the outcomes that they'd like to see? What is that shared vision? And after that, when I say they should all be bought in, they should have some idea of how that's going to translate into the work that the organization does. Some idea. Things might change, things might evolve, things might grow, but there should be some idea of that they can communicate out to the organization. So when you first engage in this work, everyone else is really looking to the direction and setting the tone for the work, the vision from your senior leadership team. After that, you might have all levels of the organization involved and even taking ownership of the work, but you really need that buy-in from the top. And then why I'm saying that the engagement is so important, because oftentimes leaders will have created that buy-in and aligned on their commitment, what that looks like. They've even done a statement of how they each want to participate in this work. And then sometimes, like anything else, we get busy, we forget, and we don't stay engaged in the work. And what happens is, if the enthusiasm, the commitment, the work behind any of your diversity, equity, and initiatives, if that starts to decrease, or people start noticing that the energy is not the same, then what happens is there's a ripple effect with everyone else in the organization. And I've seen this time and time again. So I just want to flag that the senior leadership team needs to re-engage with the process if they notice that that's what's happening throughout an engagement. And so re-engaging, what does that look like and what does that mean? It can be simple things like making sure that in their email communications, they're reintroducing, reinvigorating some of the initiatives, that they're calling out when somebody's doing a really great job on these initiatives, and calling out the leadership in a certain area, talking about a particular initiative and how well it went, what we learned from it, how this is going to support us in the organization, and making sure again that they're familiar with who's working on these initiatives and giving that appreciation, because oftentimes those that are involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion work are taking that on in a volunteer capacity, in addition to all very full workloads that they have going on. So to recap, the engagement piece is how they can communicate it visibly to the organization, making sure that they're reinvigorating certain initiatives or giving highlighting and visibility to certain initiatives, so that the whole organization is aware that the senior leadership team is supporting them, that they're seeing what's being done in this area. They're helping everyone else be aware of what's happening in the area, and congratulating those that are involved in these efforts in the same way that they would with anyone else. What I'm talking about is nothing that they wouldn't already do with other initiatives, and making sure that visibility aspect is constantly there in this space. And that really needs to come from the senior leadership team, because the message that it sends to the rest of the organization is, my senior leaders care about this. They're committed. They know what's going on. They're applauding this work. They're involved in this work. They're calling out those that are doing really great work in this space. And that continues to say, we are committed to this work. It's not just a check the box initiative.
I really love and appreciate that video. And I think one of the things that really stands out to me when I reflect back on work that I've done over the years, there are some projects that I've done that have gone wonderfully. And if I'm being honest, there have been many that haven't, and being able to reflect on what was the difference. I can think about a couple of scenarios where, sometimes when we're working on a project, we're so engrossed in what's happening with that project that sometimes we forget to be also communicating all along the way, because oftentimes we're involved to a point that other people are not aware, and you don't realize that there's gaps in communication that have occurred. And so I'm sure you can all think about maybe an example. And if you think at the end of this presentation, I would love to be able to maybe do a little bit of discussion. So if this triggered anything for you as you are watching this, of either when you led a project and something didn't happen, you ran into a pitfall, or if you were, a staff member or a provider where you saw this happen, and you can identify, what was different, maybe what didn't happen, or maybe you don't know what didn't happen. But just kind of let's put a little placeholder on that, and we'll reserve a little bit of time for discussion at the end. So leaders need to actively communicate. Communication is so critically important. They need to communicate the leadership philosophy. the intention and the plan for optimal support of projects and improvements, and the staff that are completing that work. Leadership needs to provide ongoing support for the value of the importance of change and tell the stories. We want to tell the stories about the central value of the work to the organization and also share those frontline experiences and successes. I really appreciated in her discussion how she talked about that re-engagement too, because depending also on how long that project has been going on, it's important to continue to infuse life into this and be able to, again, recap it. Sometimes you're the person who has been involved in it from the beginning, and it can lose the messaging along the way. So in this one, I wanted to just share, we're going to talk a little bit about senior leadership rounding. And have folks heard about rounding before? Is rounding something that you, okay, good, I saw a head nod. So some folks are not familiar with rounding, so we are going to just bear with me for just a moment if you're not familiar. So the traditional way that leaders, get information in the organization is oftentimes we find out because we need to be in the workplace because of the regulatory aspect of that, or it becomes problem focused. I love this, like drive-bys. I think we all do drive-bys at times, or just kind of you're walking through the clinic and say hi to everybody, but it's very kind of superficial. When I'm touring visitors, that happens a lot, very spontaneous. So that's what traditionally most leaders, that's their exposure oftentimes. But rounding is something different. This is something where it is a very intentional act. It is scheduled. Staff expect that you're going to be coming by, and what we want to do is balance those, really using that as a time to ask questions. That inquiry is really critical. Identify and celebrate those people who are high performers, and see what's working well, and more importantly, sometimes the barriers. So troubleshooting challenges and celebrating small wins. The leader's visit to the clinic or to that unit is about spending time with the team member as they perform their functions, or in the case of a project, to be overseeing what's happening with the project. So leaders need to actively, in this situation, solicit feedback in order to be able to help with the implementation of change. Again, identifying barriers, highlighting incremental successes that lead to that organizational change being achieved, and regular leadership rounding with staff and lead providers and other leadership for the purpose of information gathering, coaching, recognizing, and role modeling. It just goes a long way. I think that people understand you then better as a leader and have a different view on you when you're present. So leadership rounding creates an integral connection between you and those most responsible each day for the safe, quality care and services you provide. The best part of leadership rounding that I love is it doesn't require new infrastructure. It doesn't require technology or new staff. It just requires you, the leader, dedicating time each week or whatever your time frame is to focus on some of the most important and rewarding work that I feel that we do. Through leadership rounding, you're able to move beyond just getting a pulse on what's happening in the organization to becoming more connected, engaged, and like really creating, honestly, a safer workplace for people. So these are some of the elements of rounding on staff. This framework is something that has, again, this isn't necessarily something that is new for many of you. When rounding takes place, it's more asking than telling. So we want to spend time really in that place of like seeking information, asking respectful and open-ended questions, and avoiding those leading questions. We're not trying to drive the conversation. What we're trying to do is solicit input. We want to ask with, and listen and focus. Summarizing, it's oftentimes helpful to be able to summarize what you're hearing and focus on what the staff are saying and how they are communicating that. It is one of the things that I think is always important too, is as there are problems that are surfaced, is not making assumptions, but really understanding from staff why they think that problems are happening, and let the staff help to share with you what they believe some of the solutions can be, because oftentimes they really do have a lot of the best input in this. So the benefits of leadership rounding are highlighted here. Approachability, I think, is one of the really big things about rounding. Staff want to know that you know them. They want to know that you understand their work. They want to know that you appreciate them. And that's really the purpose of leadership rounding. It's a proven strategy that's accomplished by proactively and purposefully engaging your staff, listening to them, communicating, and supporting them. It's a feedback loop between you and your staff, and it's just a really effective, it's an effective tool. So it isn't also without sometimes challenges, because committing to it is a time commitment. You need to make sure that you carve this out in your schedule and that it's very purposeful. Once you commit to rounding, you need to show up. So that's something that is really you need to plan for it. Be sure to have the support also of other leadership and management teams before you begin rounding. So your employees need to see that leadership rounding is embraced and supported by all in your management, and you'll need managers to help encourage employees to engage in the process. Sometimes, especially initially, I think middle managers, as senior leaders are coming through, can be concerned that there are going to be issues that will be surfaced about them specifically. And we want to stay problem focused in these areas, not people focused. So we're not trying to find out what such and such is or isn't doing, or how their manager is or isn't doing in their role. We're trying to look at what is happening and there may be those things that come up, but we're going to stay really problem focused in that and not committing to anything. This is about soliciting information and just being in listening mode. Your job as a leader is to make your best judgment when issues arise, and to close the loop and communicate. So if your follow-up at the end is, I'm going to follow up with you, it's important for you to do that. Understanding the issues from the employee's perspective and connecting their problems with resources or solutions as those may be applicable to ensure the entire team is engaged with the success. So this is the piece too, is just like keeping in mind, not all staff will embrace having rounding. Some will view it with skepticism, and particularly initially, I think people oftentimes do, and may be hesitant to speak up. So just be prepared. You want to, help put people at ease and really just have a conversation. Relationship development is a really good and important aspect of this. And when you first start rounding with staff, you may find a couple of common patterns to the conversation. First, you might have some employees who are just more shy or timid, who are reticent to open up. And so that's okay. But on the other side of that, you also may run into employees or two who are very comfortable and maybe overly comfortable telling you like it is. And so sometimes it can be hard to hear, especially when you feel ownership over a project and they're being critical of that. But the best advice is to just validate their concerns. Their concerns are what their perspectives are, what their perspectives are. Remind yourself that staff are, they're not trying to necessarily make you feel that about things. We're asking for their input. And so it's important for us to keep that in mind. And that they have the best intention, their heart's in the right place, and they mean the best. So every leader who commits to rounding with staff does this when their calendars are free. So you don't want to be saying, well, I'm running to a meeting after this. It's like you're in the moment. Make sure that you're there present. Let staff also, when you're there, teach you something. Sometimes it's one of the hardest things that we do as senior leaders is to admit that we don't know everything, or to have people help us, get updated on something. And so just remaining humble. Your staff are well acquainted with the minutia of the job, and you don't necessarily need to be in the minutia sometimes as a senior leader, but it's good to be able to understand what their work is like too. And then in follow-up, I think if there are thank you notes or anything that you feel is a good way to wrap things up after your visit, or even, providing notes during the visit, I think that that's always something nice. It shows that your staff, that you notice them and that you took the time to respond, and it definitely reinforces any desired behavior you're looking for. Once you complete rounding 2, as it makes sense, and I'll say, for somebody who does rounding really regularly, it's important to loop back at times that it makes sense to. You don't have to do that all the time, but there are times that it's really good to like communicate what you learned, either within that work group to that individual, or sometimes even organization wide, there may be things that come up. And just for anybody who isn't doing leader rounding, it may not feel natural at first. It may feel like, I will definitely say the first times that I was doing leadership rounding, it took time out of my day that I didn't know that I had. And now it's something that I just really cherish, because I have relationships with the people that I work with now, and they know that they can talk to me about things, and that it's never punitive. It's just about, kind of trying to understand what's going on in their world. So I'm going to stop sharing. And what I wanted to do is really kind of open this up to discussion and see what things resonated with you. We can go back to the projects and pitfalls. That might be a great place to go back to. In your, experience as a leader, as a provider, as a staff member, or a combination of those, have you had times where a project hasn't gone? If there's anybody who's willing to share an example, that would be really, it's always nice to hear, because I think we learn a lot from one another. And feel free to unmute, or if you want to put something in the chat too. Guys are a quiet group today. All right. It's okay. Maybe we can talk about, leadership rounding, if that is something, or if that happens in your organization and what that looks like.
Hi. Excuse me. Hi.
Hi.
Share. I think going back to your first question about an example, I can maybe share a little bit about that, and then circle back to the second question of the troubleshooting, or just like how to communicate best in a leadership, or if there's rounding that's happening. So I think for an example, I have seen what you have shared in the past, where like seeing projects being very successful and then projects not being very successful, or taking a longer time to get to that like final point of where everybody was hoping to get or achieve as soon as possible. And it's that shared vision, I think, that coming back to that, having the importance of the top leaders or the senior leaders really communicating and reiterating over periods of time so that it's not like forgotten or it's not perceived as if they no longer care or like they were just checking off a box, that they continue to reiterate like what the purpose is, and that has been so helpful. And then hearing you say that again, it was just like, yeah, I can see how that influenced projects that either I've been a part of or that colleagues have shared about what's going on in their department. So I think I just wanted to reflect back on that. And then with the rounding, that is happening in our institution. Some things that are like mandatory, but then also outside, like there's like check-ins, right? Like that management is asked to do with their staff, but then at least my manager has encourages us to schedule time at any time that we may need that. And so some of that responsibility is sometimes placed on the staff member, but she herself also has like the routine rounding and it's like scheduled that we check in. But and then the communicate what you learned. I think that's important too for like, me to just kind of share back to her as well. To my manager what I have learned. She does ask that already too. So I was nice. I don't know. It was just like reassuring. I'm like, oh, my manager, I feel like is doing a really good job. Like check on everything that you've been sharing.
Oh, good, good. No, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. I think it, even as you were talking about that, there were a lot of things that I was remembering too of previous instances, and I'll maybe share a couple. But one of the things that I wanted to ask is, for you as your manager is doing rounding, how does that just make you feel too as a staff member? And I would say too, with my staff, there is the one-on-one meetings, and then there's the like rounding, and those things to me are kind of uniquely different. But yeah, how does that make you feel and others in your organization as you're doing rounding, or as they are doing rounding?
Well, like you said, it comes back to the relationship building, right? Like that I have someone that I trust and that I can confide in, and we can like problem solve together, or like it's just somebody that I know I can go to. Whereas I think sometimes um I have experienced or have heard from colleagues too, like I don't know where to go. Like I don't feel like I can go to my manager. I don't feel like I can go talk to leadership to um talk about whatever it is. So I think that's the biggest thing, is like that the building rapport, the trust, so that we can troubleshoot, and that it's not isolated, that you felt like you have to do it on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's having that open line of communication too, where you feel like you have that relationship. You likely have a higher, and you speak to this already, a higher comfort level of being able to express too, when there may be barriers that you're running into, and that person can really step in and help problem solve. Yeah, good. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's great. Anybody else have anything you want to share?
Chrissy, I've got a question for you.
Please.
Dan Crow, I was curious, the rounding during the pandemic, did that all go virtual? And if you've had an opportunity to compare virtual rounding versus in-person rounding, which do you think is more effective?
I definitely think in-person rounding is just, it's so much different when you're physically sharing space with people. And at the same time, at my current location, we have 8 sites. And so sometimes rounding does happen virtually. But the preference is always to, from my perspective, to be able to do that face-to-face when you can.
Makes
I
sense.
like having meals with people, when you're able to share physical space, it really does create relationships so much differently. And then people aren't multitasking and the things that, happen virtually, just in whether or not we like that or not. So,
Great, thank you.
of course. Good. Well, I see one of the things that does that we were when we were talking, I was reflecting on was when I first was involved in integration of behavioral health into primary care, and my great friend Julie Oyamaja jumped in like right in the middle of that, and uh, so what I wanted to just share is so this was like, I think 2013, 2014, when we first did integration of behavioral health into our primary care site that was very large. We had 23 clinics. And one of the challenges I think that we ran into that very much speaks to this leadership piece is that we weren't all on the same board. And it was happening kind of in a silo at a singular location, and where I mean, ultimately it ended up being fantastic. And I think there were a lot of bruised knees along the way because we missed the mark on some of the communication really early on, bringing providers and staff into understanding what we were trying to accomplish and providing that education piece. And I think that we ended up getting that right at the end, but it just took us a while as we were. And Julie, I see you nodding your head, so please feel free to unmute and just briefly, if there's anything that you want to share. But we, yeah, I think that just reminded me as we were talking about, it was definitely a time where the communication, there were lots of gaps. And when we ultimately realized that and were able to get education out to staff about what is integrated behavioral health, and that was a catalyst to just PCBH just being able to launch. So.
Yeah, I put the article that we wrote together with Patty Robinson, which has the case study for that program in its completion. It was completed in 2016 and was six years of work. But also that system, they were early pioneers. And so everything that the whole trajectory of integration can be laid out within that organization. So we ended up being the capstone when there was really understanding in our literature about what was best practice. And so we were able to put that fully in place. But there was this integration history that follows the general integration history all within the organization. So that could lead to communication because we were figuring it out. We were figuring it out for the field. But I love the article we were able to write at the end in 2018. It was published, which was the end state, which was PCBH.
Thank you for sharing, and thank you for joining. That you had good timing jumping in. Anyone
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I just want to say thank you for sharing that article, because I'm thinking even when there's turnover or new staff come on board or residents or, just anybody that's doing rotations, that could be pretty, sometimes often, just pending on the organization. I think in particular with residents, and having this as maybe like a quick article to look at as they prepare to be embedded or working in the clinic is really helpful. Like I'm almost thinking, when you have like new hire modules that you have to complete, like could this be added to something like that?
Yeah, we actually have at my current organization, we are incorporating PCBH into the orientation. That is like a standard part. And I actually see one of my staff that just joined in. So hi, Cynthia. But we are starting to do that as part of that routine onboarding, is, just understanding what it is, because there is not always great understanding of what that model is if people haven't worked in an integrated location. Yeah, good. Thank you. Anybody else have any stories they want to share, or, particularly I think around where where staff weren't, where even leadership weren't on the same board. I will use, and this is not related to behavioral health, but I'll share an example of, and it was situational, but where there were leadership challenges and kind of how that happened. So when COVID hit, we had, as an organization, already made the decision that we were going to do a change of our EMR. And if any of you have ever lived through that before, that in itself is it is a all organization, all hands on deck, important for everybody to be on the same page. So just for perspective, I think we all closed down for COVID on March 13th of 2020. And my launch of our preparation for our EMR was on March 20th of 2020, 7 days after we all went into lockdown. And to say that leadership was not all on the same page about us moving forward with this project cannot be an understatement. And so we had, but sharing behind the curtain, there was a lot of heated discussions about what we were doing, and that there was a ripple that happened across the organization because we had some leaders that didn't keep that one team together. It's important, critically important for leadership, senior leadership, to be speaking with one voice. And so there was some kind of damage control that we had to do. And so I use that only as an example also of the critical importance. And I think Kari speak to it in her video, and you'll have this video if you ever want to like re-look at that. But of everybody, kind of singing from the same songbook, it's important for there to staff and providers to see that alignment of all of that senior leadership team in order for folks, because if you have naysayers along the way, you're going to have people who are going to be picking at it. And so it's just really important to be on the same page. If there are critical conversations in that senior leadership team, that those are had and behind closed doors, and then kind of that sharing out. It's important. So anybody else have anything to share? Well, I've really enjoyed the conversation today, and there's my contact information is they have it, and we'll get the slides out to you so that you can have that for your records if you'd like that. And Alina, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Miss Christie and Julie, for hopping in, and your staff is so supportive. I see them coming in to support you, so that's awesome. So I'll just go ahead and close. It is 12:53, so you guys are free to leave, but before you do, we will be sending you a follow-up email with the evaluation survey, so be sure to fill that out for your CEUs. And in addition to that, Angelica is actually one of our students for our current behavioral health consultant certificate course that we have for LCSWs, LMFTs, psychologists, and professional counselors, and we're doing an all virtual session next year. So if you're interested, we'll also include that information in the email. But other than that, thank you all so much, and we'll see you next month. All right, bye everyone.
Bye everyone, thank you.